Ladies and gentlemen, this is TVP World. I'm your host, Benjamin Lee, and welcome aboard the Eastern Express. On this episode, we're looking into the political turbulence in Georgia. Thousands of people in Tbilisi, Georgia's capital, waving European Union flags like they're at Eurovision, but with way more tear gas. Now, these protesters aren't just your average weekend hobby. They've been going strong for several nights. But why? Well, that's because Prime Minister Irakli Kobakidze decided to hit snooze on EU accession talks until 2028. That's like being at the front of the roller coaster line and saying, you know what, I'll wait for the next one, maybe in 5 years.
Scenes like these of police brutality in Georgia are running rampant online. The Georgian authorities' wrath is reaching for more than the protesters, however. In this footage, you can see them attack a cameraman. The protesters themselves are fighting back with whatever they can. The streets of Tbilisi are transforming into battlefields. The protests are becoming more than a fight for freedom. They are a fight for the survival of the values the protesters are standing up to defend. And they want the world to know about their struggles. They even occupied the building of Georgia's public broadcaster and took over the live stream, drawing attention to the police brutality. The treatment of civilians and the suspension of Georgia's EU accession process by the Georgian Dream Party has led the US to halt its strategic partnership with Georgia, a blow to the country's transatlantic ties. The Georgian Dream Prime Minister says his party won the elections. He is ready to replace the incumbent pro-Western president, though she has deemed parliament illegitimate and is ready for a showdown.
There is no legitimate parliament, and therefore an illegitimate parliament cannot elect a new president. Thus, no inauguration can take place, and my mandate continues.
European leadership has condemned the unfolding situation and has questioned the validity of the elections. Georgian authorities seem to be trying to stick their fingers into their ears and show how little they care for ties with the West. But the Georgian people are buying none of what the Georgian dream is selling. They are showing that they are dreaming an entirely different dream.
And now let's take a look at the issue in greater detail. To begin, it's worth mentioning that this situation is not limited to just the capital. Protests are popping up across the country like mushrooms after a rainstorm. The people are angry, determined, and apparently well prepared. Some even show up with diving masks to fend off tear gas. If you're thinking that sounds dramatic, well, so is the government's response. Rubber bullets, water cannons, and police chasing protesters like they're auditioning for an action movie. Protesters aren't just about the EU talks. They're fueled by an October election that a critic says was so rigged that they would make Alexander Lukashenko feel right at home. Though Georgian Dream, the ruling party, claimed a victory, pro-European opposition groups called fraud and boycotted parliament. New allegations of massive electoral fraud in Georgia's October elections, statistical evidence and eyewitness accounts suggest approximately 300,000 voters, around 10% of the total, were manipulated to favor the ruling Georgian Dream Party. Independent polls show Georgian Dreams polling between 40 to 41%, a stark contrast to the official result of 53.92%. Rural areas exhibited abnormal turnout patterns, indicate of ballot stuffing and voter busing, while urban centers align with normal statistical distributions. And let's not forget cases of intimidation of voters outside polling stations by criminal groups. Election observers faced physical assaults and arrests, and voter secrecy was compromised in 90% of precincts. But here's the kicker. Critics says Georgian Dream isn't just shelving EU talks, they're actively steering the country closer to Russia. Enter President Salome Zurabishvili, who's basically standing on quicksand, declaring herself the only legitimate institution in the country. And honestly, she might have a point. The constitutional law expert says the new parliament jumped the gun, approving its own credentials before the courts ruled on Zurabishvili's challenge to the election results. That's like grading your own test and declaring yourself valedictorian. Meanwhile, the international community is left clutching its pearls. The European Parliament rejected the election results, the diplomats are resigning in protest, and even France, Britain, and Ukraine are chiming in. It's like a global intervention where everyone's saying, Georgia, we're not mad, we're just disappointed. So, where does this leave Georgia? With the government digging in its heels and opposition refusing to play ball and protesters demanding change, the country is at a crossroads. Will it embrace its European aspirations, or will it continue down a path that leads to isolation and authoritarianism? Well, only time will tell, but one thing is clear. The people of Georgia aren't backing down anytime soon. And now, here to shed more light on the issue is Grigor Ulihidze, Associate Professor of the Caucasus University. Hello, sir, and welcome to Eastern Express.
Good morning.
So we are looking at a very rapid escalation in the protests in Georgia right now. But first thing first, let's roll it back a little bit, because we've seen Georgians protesting on the street for several days now. What's contributing to the most recent outbreak?
Well, the decision of the government to suspend any kind of cooperation and attempts of Euro integration has been received very negatively, as you see. And we see more and more Georgians demonstrating on the main venues of the country, including the capital city, Tbilisi, Batumi, Kutaisi, and other major towns. I would say that the violence that is being applied to against the demonstrators caused even more anger among Georgians, and that's why the number of the demonstrators is increasing on a daily basis. I do not know what to expect in the coming days, but one thing is clear, that this is the largest and the biggest crisis of modern Georgia since regaining the independence.
Right, we're looking at the screen right now at the footage, and there seems to be a lot going on there. When it comes to the violence and the escalation of it, do we know what kind of sparked this kind of ongoing escalation? We see the protests are utilizing fireworks, and the police are rolling out water cannons and rubber bullets. Pretty extreme measure, I would say.
That's only one chapter of the story, because the images, the footage that we saw over the past 3 days caused and evoked great anger, as I have mentioned, because we saw girls, 17, 18, 19 years old, beaten extremely violently by the representatives of special forces, police groups, and unknown militia groups, I would say, because they are not under the umbrella of the Ministry of Internal Affairs, because they don't have identification numbers. So we were also shocked to see the dramatic footage how journalists are beaten by the police without any need, because journalists are only covering the current state of affairs. They do not pose any threat to them, but still several of them have been hospitalized, and their health condition is quite grave.
Right, and from what I've heard, there's also the utilization of, well, reportedly the use of tear gas and other more extreme measure when it comes to trying to temper down these protests, which I can see that's not really happening.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely agree with you. The excessive force, violent methods that have nothing in common with the Georgian, I would say, reality. Sometimes we hear different allegations that cannot be confirmed, that the additional forces have been used and invited from Belarus, from Russia. That's the speculation, of course, but nothing can be figured out, because this is the modus operandi very, very similar to the Russian tactics. This brutality and this violent character of the confrontation with the civil society, students, ordinary citizens, women, elderly people.
Right, things does seem to look like it's going out of hand right now. But when it comes to the political spectrum, what do you think is going to happen next? Because the president seems to be reluctant to step down, but the prime minister is also trying to force her hand. Where do you see this going politically?
We are going to a very bad direction. There are several scenarios. First scenario, we will witness the internal disintegration of the Georgian dream, because a lot of workers, including ambassadors, are resigning. Workers of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ministry of Defense, National Bank of Georgia, they join anti-government petition. The workers of the City Hall, and today is Monday, and we will see a lot of things. We will see a lot of resignations today. This is the first scenario. The second scenario is quite pessimistic for Georgia, in which the Georgian dream remains in power and prevails. And the third scenario is very, very unpredictable scenario and very bad. If something terrible happens, and if there are fatalities, and we cannot figure out anything because excessive force used by police cannot be justified, and you cannot get any guarantees that no one will be hurt, or it will not cause any fatalities. And then happens unpredictable things, something like the events that we saw in Ukraine in 2013, or similar like that. We do not want to see this scenario. We want to see that the change of power through elections. But unfortunately, the Georgian dream is acting like authoritarian power and has no intention to make compromises and concessions.
Do you see the international intervention stepping in and perhaps doing anything about this?
Well, I would say that only the United States and the Baltic countries, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, expressed their readiness to sanction individuals responsible for this brutal confrontation and brutal methods. But we did not see any tangible result or measure on action from the European Union. Nothing, because of the quite problematic and hard bureaucracy of this institution. It will take months, and that's why the only thing that the demonstrators are demanding from and asking for to the European partners is to sanction individually, on the individual basis, on the basis of national decision, the people responsible for these events.
Right, and like you mentioned, there is, of course, unconfirmed information about possibly having a foreign interference with the whole system, be it the election, be it this escalation of protests. Do you see that that's going to remain a concern, or even if it's not for an intervention, might this stand to benefit forces like Russia, Belarus?
If Georgia remains beyond the European Union and the perspective to become, at least the perspective to become the EU country, it automatically means that this country will remain under the claws of the Russian Federation. And that's the problem. A lot of Europeans do not understand that. A lot of Europeans criticize the European Union, but they do not understand the reality, Georgian reality, in which there is Russia and there is only an alternative, the West, because Georgia is not a strong country which could be individually operating on international arena like Turkey is. Georgia is a small country, and if it is not associated with the West and supported by strategic partners, Russia will benefit from it. And you know quite well that we speak about the South Caucasus, very complicated geopolitical area. And we talk about the country which has neighbors like Russia, and regional neighbors like Iran. Its neighbors are not Liechtenstein, Norway, or I don't know, France.
Right, like you mentioned, Georgia perhaps does not have the sort of luxury to be independent of being into any big organizations such as Europe. But like you said earlier as well, the aspirations into join the European Union has been put on hold, delayed, pushed back, whichever way the government is trying to describe it. Do you think that this decision, do you see that being reverted as a possibility?
What kind of decision? Could you repeat the question?
To delay the integration into the European Union.
Well, that's the indirect message to the society, which is very, very pro-Western, that they do not want to continue this path. Because if you pause this Euro integration process, which is objectively very, very complicated, what kind of chances will a country like Georgia have in terms of Euro integration, while this door of opportunity will be closed, and it will be closed because it will not be opened forever when and if Moldova and Ukraine join the European Union. Georgia will stay out of this club for many, many decades and many, many years. And that's why that's another maneuver offered by the ruling party to somehow distance itself from the West and enlarge the cooperation with Russia, which brings the benefits only to one side, to Moscow.
Right, so perhaps there's an attempt at not really just delaying, but the delay could delay it long enough for the window to be closed. Perhaps the real intention behind it is to not really be integrated in the first place. Thank you so much for breaking all of this down. Really appreciate it. Thanks for your input and insight, and thanks for being with us on Eastern Express. And now we're moving on to the Eastern News Flash, a series of all the other stories from the East that you don't want to miss. We begin with a significant development in Central and Eastern Europe, Romania's election season. With the majority of votes now tallied, the ruling Social Democratic Party has emerged victorious in a contest.
This election season in Romania is pivotal. Many see it as the one which will decide whether the country will continue its pro-Western course and keep on supporting Ukraine, or if it will lean into Euroscepticism and more pro-Russian narratives. This year's parliamentary elections can be considered a fight between the left-leaning Social Democratic Party of Romania, who was shown as the winner in the early exit polls, and the far-right Alliance for the Unity of Romanians, which in early polls came second. This second set of elections comes on the heels of the first round of the disputed presidential vote, which saw far-right independent candidate Călin Georgescu emerge victorious. Victorious but disputed because the country's constitutional court has ordered a recount of the votes. A rerun may be ordered based on the recount results.
Turning to the political dynamics surrounding Ukraine, new reports reveal an intriguing diplomatic exchange. According to sources speaking with Radio Free Europe, U.S. President-elect Donald Trump has sought the perspective of Hungary's Viktor Orban on the ongoing war in Ukraine.
Donald Trump and Viktor Orban are two men often seen as having very similar views of the world. It comes as no surprise, then, that the former would look to the latter for some advice. Despite Hungary being a pariah of sorts in the European Union, Trump has maintained a close relationship with the Hungarian Prime Minister. Following the Russian full-scale invasion of Ukraine and the West's collective stance against Moscow, Budapest has maintained a cordial relationship with Vladimir Putin, in large part due to the amount of energy that Hungary imports from Russia. At the same time, Orban has been highly critical of the aid being sent to Ukraine and has been trying to end the war independently of his European partners, a move that has been strongly criticized. Trump's incoming presidency could boost Orban's attempts at playing peacekeeper, especially considering reports that he'll take another crack at it in December as part of Hungary's soon-to-end rotating EU presidency.
Meanwhile, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has made a bold declaration regarding NATO membership. Zelensky stated that any path to joining the alliance must respect Ukraine's 1991 borders, directly challenging suggestions that he might concede Russian-occupied territories to secure NATO inclusion.
Ukraine's potential NATO membership continues to be a touchy topic. Although Kyiv would want nothing more than to join the alliance, it seems that it will not do so unless Russian forces are pushed out of the territories Moscow is currently occupying. It is no secret at this point that the war is not progressing exactly as Ukrainian and Western leadership had hoped. The situation, both diplomatically given the upcoming changes in the White House and militarily, has become difficult. What's more, Zelensky said in an interview with Sky News that Ukraine's partners have only equipped 2.5 brigades despite having requested arms for 10. He maintained that troop numbers aren't Ukraine's biggest problem, but the lack of proper equipment is. There has reportedly been pressure from Western leadership about Ukraine lowering its mobilization age from 25 to 18. Do you want someone to go to their death without weapons? Zelensky said in context of this pressure.
Finally, while Western nations face criticism for hesitating to support Ukraine, Russia is ramping up its military investment. President Vladimir Putin has signed the 2025 budget bill, which includes a 25% increase in defense spending compared to 2024.
Russia is all in on moving to a wartime economy. The latest state budget shows that it is wasting no money now when it comes to spending on its military, as it must recover from the heavy losses it suffered in Ukraine. What's more, the constantly developing situation in Syria might also be playing a role in this budget bump, as Russia is heavily invested in the conflict in the area. Russia's invasion of Ukraine has more than put its economy and military industry to the test. It has forced it to reassess itself almost completely and even look for aid in countries like Iran and North Korea, something perhaps unthinkable prior to the war. This cost is also in human lives. As mobilization to replenish troops is deeply unpopular in Russia, the government has been carrying out an extensive campaign meant to encourage men to sign up for the front, dangling the promise of hefty bonuses and wartime glory right in front of their eyes.
And that was all on this episode of Eastern Express. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TPP World.